international Zoom meeting. Because of the pandemic, we have decided that we're going to use technology to meet and to greet everyone. And it has been a blessing because, we can reach out to so many more people who are not able to come and join us in our meetings. Our meeting on Zoom has been going to various nations in the world. We have Roger Lam with us this evening, and he is our presenter, and he will be speaking to us from his home in Hong Kong this evening. So for those of you who don't know, it's Friday morning, 7:17 Friday morning in Hong Kong. So Roger had to get up a bit early this morning to prepare himself so he could share with us. So we do appreciate your effort, Roger, for what you're doing. We have been excited by your presentation, and so we wanted to continue with this. So as we begin our meetings, I just want to start with a word of prayer. So we could all bow our heads. We go to God in prayer. Father in heaven, we give you thanks for your grace and your loving kindness that you have bestowed upon this day. Lord, you have blessed us to see another beautiful day, and we give you thanks for it. We thank you, God, for the precious blood of Jesus Christ that cleansed us from every guilty stain, and we apply that blood to every home and every person that is joining us this evening. And those who cannot be with us, Father, we stand in the gap for them. We pray for them. We thank you, God, for cleansing and washing us from every guilty stain at this moment, so that as we come before your throne, of God, and to hear your word from Roger, we thank you, God, that our hearts will be receptive to his word. I pray, dear God, a special anointing upon Roger, that your Holy Spirit shall use him all to your honor, to your glory. We thank you, dear God, for giving him the wisdom and for giving him understanding so that he could delve into your word and also share from his experience to teach and to edify us and to help us in our walk in this Christian life. We thank you for all the brothers that are joining us from the different islands and different countries. I pray your blessing upon all the nations of this world. We thank you for delivering all of us from this pandemic and from this COVID-19 virus that has affected so many nations in the world and so many millions of people. We thank you for your hand of deliverance over us all. We thank you, God, as we continue this evening for a great message and a great teaching. We thank you for all those that will be joining us. We pray your blessing upon all of them as we ask this prayer with the forgiveness of all our sins. In Jesus Christ's name, amen. So this evening, our presenter is Roger. For those of you who did not see the messages before, Roger, let me just share with you. Roger is from Hong Kong, and he is the author of a book called Lost and Found: Money versus Riches, and also Lose the Fine Change of Control. He worked in the banking sector for many years, in the finance industry for almost 25 years. He's a graduate. He graduated from University Phi Beta Kappa from Cornell University in 1993. In the past few years, he discovered his stewardship. That stewardship is his true calling. And so he has been using the gift that God has given him to tell his own story intertwined with money. And he has been going to many churches and many places. Now he is sharing his word with us in the Caribbean here and even the US, and how God has been using him and using biblical principles to teach us on wealth and possession. So he is now a full-time alternative missionary with a God-given vision to unveil the deceitfulness of wealth to Christ's followers globally and hope to cure the root problem of many social ills. He lives in Hong Kong with his wife, Sylvia, and their children, Danielle and Enoch. And I know Roger will tell you more about himself and his experiences and how God has used him in the ministry to win souls over to Christ. And that's all our mission, really, to share God's word and to encourage one another and to understand that, you know, Christ is everything to you and I. So I now will ask Roger to take the meeting over to share his word.
Thank you, brother. It's an absolute delight and honor to be invited back to share with you all in the Caribbean. Well, I'm gonna dive straight into the new materials. So apologies for those who didn't have the background, but I think as I go along, I think you can sort of get it. And it's also, my previous session was also recorded on YouTube. It's available on the FGBMFI Trinidad and Tobago channel, should you be interested. So I'm gonna basically, last time, the last story that I shared with you was about the large size generosity story, which basically ended with, I got a multimedia message from God, not only with a word to sell, and then within like 90 minutes, I got a written word from a translation that was brand new to me, but in a verse that I was very, very familiar with, because that day was February 4th, 2018, and my Proverbs reading for that day is from Proverbs 4. So Proverbs chapter 4, verse 5 from the Message, which I haven't read before, said, "Sell everything and buy wisdom." So I sold everything the following day, and then the punchline is the next morning when I woke up, I was apprehensive of checking my phone because I was afraid that everything rebounded and I would feel really stupid. So I prayed to the Lord to comfort me should I discover that everything's rebounded since. But to my great surprise, when I switched on the phone, I discovered that there was a purpose for God giving me a multimedia instructions the day before to obey him. And it turned out that the Dow Jones Index dropped by another 1,500 points after the 666 point drop on Friday. So the story really begins from here. I was paying, after a few days, the stock settled and the proceeds were wired to my account, and I was painfully aware that part of the money doesn't belong to me. I had pledged half of the profits of my largest investment, that any price above $100 that I sell, half of that I would give to the church, my church, for church premises. I sold the stock at 227, so there was a very healthy chunk of profits to be given. So I knew this money didn't belong to me, and it was starting to get, a little bit unnerving that it was sitting in my account. So I kept urging. I told my pastor and the stewardship committee at church exactly what had happened, and that this money was sitting in my account, and I'm really itching to get it off, transfer it to the church. But then my pastor said, well, council hasn't met yet. We haven't decided whether we're going to explore this as a possibility yet. So hold on to the money. And then, and then a week, and then 2 went by, and then I was just, increasingly uneasy about it. And then one day, and Psalm 76 verse 11 says, basically, whatever vows that you make to the Lord, you need to honor them. And I thought, okay, Lord, this is, well noted. It's not that I wasn't trying. I mean, they weren't ready the church is not ready to take the money. And then a few days later, my New Testament reading for the day was Acts chapter 5, and it's that famous couple of Ananias and Sapphira. So that got, me even more agitated that, hey, Lord, I'm really not trying to, hold back the money. The church is not ready to take it yet. And because of reading Acts chapter 5, I decided to ensure the absolute safety of me and my wife, that I did not take into the commissions or transaction costs in that stock sale into account. And on top of that, I rounded it up to a nice round even number, such that there was absolutely, no doubt that, I was not trying to skim anything off the top. And if anything, I topped it up. And then I was very pleased to, after much bugging of my pastor, that he said to me, oh, council finally met and we agreed to pursue this conversation. I emailed my banker and said, I need to send this lump sum to this account in Hong Kong, which belongs to my church. Now, I thought this was all done. And then the next day, my banker tells me that the payment bounced. I'm like, what? How can a payment bounce? What is happening? So I was extremely distressed. So I contacted the church treasurer right away to find out what happened. And this is really funny. It turns out that the church bank account was set up so long ago. It was an old style bank account that they actually had a ceiling. They had a cap on how much money can come in to the bank account. So I guess my amount, was the first time ever that it busted through that limit on the upside. So, she dealt with it, she removed that limit, and then, I made sure that the transfer went through the next day. So I thought that was kind of funny, and I'm not boasting, but I just thought that was kind of hilarious. And then the very next day after the payment hit my church's bank account, a new adventure begun. But it began in such an innocuous way that I just thought it was a breakfast meeting. So I was invited to meet with the founder of Movement Day, Mac Peer, who happened to be in Hong Kong that day. So, again, I was really naive. I just thought he was, coming through town, and I thought I was invited to do a, meet and greet breakfast meeting, and then that was it. But no, it wasn't. Mac was basically shortly into breakfast. He made it pretty clear why he got someone to invite a group of us to sit down and meet with him. So he said that now this meeting took place in March. He said 8.5 months later, in the end of November, there's going to be a global conference in Washington, D.C. And it's going to gather all the global leaders in Movement Day, and he wanted to see if there will be people interested to participate in Hong Kong. So we went around the table and then to gather to hear what our thoughts were. Now, my first thought was, well, Lord, I made the deal with you that after losing my job, I would write the book, get endorsements, find a publisher, get it published, and then all else will be given to me, right? That's Matthew 6:33. So this conference is 8.5 months away. What if I get a job again, and then I won't be able to honor my commitment now? So I better not say that I'm going. And then I was also thinking, now if I don't get a job for the next 8.5 months, this conference is only for a day, and it's like a 16-hour flight away. So it makes no sense for me to just go to DC for a day. It's going to be expensive. It's going to be time consuming. It's totally inefficient. So, it doesn't make sense for me to go. And then after I had all these, like my own arguments go through my mind, and then I heard a very soft whisper, which, again, I knew was coming from God. He just said 2 words to me. He said, "Be there." So, once it got to my turn to share, then I said to Mac, I said, "Well, Mac, Holy Spirit just told me to be there. So I guess I'm on. I'll see you in Washington, D.C. in end of November." And I still had a lot of doubt in mind. My book was finished. It was, I had, I was almost done with the final manuscript from cover to cover. And I really didn't know what was next in my life. So in the meantime, there was a big event that I was invited to speak at, and it's the Celebration of Generosity. It's a conference that was going to be hosted in Hong Kong by what I deem to be the premier global generosity ministry called Generosity Path. So the founder, he was so gracious that not only did he, upon reviewing my draft manuscript, not only did he write a glowing endorsement for my book, he invited me to speak at his conference. Now, this was a total shock to me, and I'll tell you why. A year ago, I went to this conference. The previous year's conference was held in Macau, and they had a superstar lineup of speakers. They had who moved from San Francisco to Hong Kong recently. They had Mr. David Green of the Hobby Lobby fame in his lifetime so far. So I thought, okay, it's going to be you're going to invite me as a speaker, but I guess the risk is on the organizer. It's not on me. So I relished upon the challenge and the opportunity, and I was looking forward to it. And what made it exciting was that the staff at Generosity Path said to me, "Well, we like your book so much that we want to make it your global launch party if it's possible. So speak to your publisher, see if you could have the book ready by April 13th, and we would like to buy a copy from you to as a gift to all the participants." And I was just thinking, oh Lord, thank you so much. I cannot imagine that there to be a better launch party for my book, and it's at the premier global generosity ministry, and all the right people will get a copy of it, and I was just like, so I contacted my publisher. I said, look, I've got this, I need to get a couple hundred copies ready in Hong Kong by April 13th. Just tell me exactly when I need to finalize the book by. And then they told me categorically, as long as you do it, as long as you have it done, finalized by the end of March, your book will be ready at the conference. So I rushed, and then I submitted the manuscript from cover to cover a few days early. Actually, a matter of fact, almost a week early. I sent it to them on March 25th. And then they said this to me. They said, "Oh, well, congratulations, you actually got it done in time. But perhaps we forgot to inform you. There is a back-end 6-week process before your book can be published." And I was like, what? You gotta be kidding me. I'm gonna miss, my moment of glory of having hundreds of copies of my book delivered to the right people at the right conference. I was so angry, you cannot believe it. So anyways, but in hindsight, and I'll share it with you in about 10 to 15 minutes, you will see how this led to even more glory for God. So I believe this was actually a God-ordained delay. Now, basically, I was laid off in October. I had a gardening period of 3 months. So I had a paycheck that lasted till January, and then I finally became, officially unemployed. In Hong Kong, there's a government statutory severance payment, and I had worked long enough at my firm and its predecessor. So basically, I got about a month's worth of wages for my bare minimums government statutory severance payment. And so I kept on tithing using my auto pay through January, February. And then March, I had no income because after I sold everything, God told me to be still, right? So I just put, all the cash in money markets, which was basically earning nothing. So after the March installment of the auto pay for my tithe, I really couldn't justify it anymore. So with great pain, in April, I just justified that, well, you have no income. How can you really can't tithe anymore. But I had such a strong attachment with this spiritual discipline because this was how my journey began. This was part 1 of 3 in my Micah 6:8 healing journey from my fear of over provision and money. So it was with great sadness, counterintuitively. It was with great sadness that I logged onto my internet bank account and went to the auto pay instructions and to delete my tithing auto instructions to my church's bank account. And then I noticed something very, very spookily interesting. That day was April 12th, 2018. I had, despite logging onto my account and by trying to delete my autopay instruction, I discovered that the day I first set up my autopay instruction was on the exact same day, April 12th, but it was 13 years ago in 2005. So I took that as a sign that, this is all within God's control, and it's not beyond. He knew I had to cancel, but he was not taking it grudgingly, and that basically I felt he was saying to me, we've got this. Don't worry about it. The very next day after I canceled this auto pay instruction on the 13th anniversary of setting up this auto pay instruction, the celebration of generosity started. And it was in a very nice hotel in an outlying island in Hong Kong. So that was a Friday, and my keynote speaking slot was not till Saturday morning. So they offered me a hotel accommodation, and then there was a gala dinner on Friday. And so when I checked in, I was relatively relaxed, and I thought I had gone to enough of these events to know that maximizing mingling is one of their objectives. So I just assumed that the people I was going to sit with on Friday night were not going to be the same people on Saturday morning. So I paid relatively little attention to the couple I sat next to on Friday night. There were a couple from Singapore. We honestly didn't talk about anything overly important or exciting. We just exchanged some pleasant, brother and sisterly chit chat. And then by the evening program was over, I just thought, nice meeting you. See you later. And then the next day, I went back to the ballroom, and then I looked at the seating arrangement, and then I was a little surprised. They did not change it. It's going to be, I was surprised that they didn't, reshuffle the seating arrangement. So I'll go back to my table, and it's the same Singaporean couple next to me. And then it was my turn to share. So I had this was the first time I had delivered the full-length story, starting from my childhood trauma to my life group experience transformation, and then the whole Micah 6:8 thing, and then the ultimate truth about money, and then the small, medium, large size generosity stories. So I went a little bit over time, but then it was so well received that I received a standing ovation for it. And then I just went back to my table. And now, if you recall from the large size story, I did not mention the name of the stock that I had pledged to God and that I had sold, right? So I go back to the table, and then the Singaporean lady says, "Oh, congratulations. That was such a wonderful testimony." And I said, "Praise the Lord." And then she said she started to have this conversation with me, which was just 100% surreal. She said to me, "Now, I didn't mean to talk business, because it's one of those unspoken rules at this conference to not talk about business. But I really couldn't help it but to notice the stock that you mentioned, that you sold and pledged to God. Would it happen to be such and such a stock listed on the NASDAQ?" And I was like, "Yeah, how did you know?" And then she said, "Well, interestingly, 3 days ago, I received a mandate to place a Series D tranche of a private placement on an unlisted company that's from Israel. It's a semiconductor company, and basically they are destined to overthrow or dethrone the company that you had just sold. Would you be interested to explore in this opportunity?" And then you cannot imagine how big of a surge of a voltage went through my body. I had thought that selling that stock was a sacrifice, and God told me to be still for like months, earning no income. And I thought, wow, that was a big sacrifice. And it turns out, wow, I sold something at its peak, and it's going to be dethroned by this like unlisted Israeli company, and I cannot believe it. After I tell the story of my life on stage to glorify God, now he immediately he rewards me with this, and it gets much better than this. And then the lady said, "Well, the CEO happens to be in Shenzhen right now, just across the border in China. He's gonna pass through Hong Kong tonight en route to Tokyo tomorrow morning. Would you like to meet him?" I said, "Yeah, I would love to meet him." And then it got even better than that. She said, "Well, and after you meet him and you get more interested, we can talk about our upcoming trip to Aviv. We're planning to go to Israel in a few weeks' time. The schedule's not set yet, but the purpose is not so much exclusively to do due diligence on the company or to meet the company management, but the most important thing is actually to meet the single largest shareholder in the company, because we need to earn their approval to invest in this Series D tranche. And the whole reason why there's still, a little bit of this tranche left is that originally a Chinese internet giant was going to buy the whole thing. But the major shareholder from Israel was not so thrilled about that idea. So they bought the majority of it, but there's this leftover piece, and you'll be basically having the same rights and investing on the same terms as this internet giant. So that's how it came about. And then I was just like getting more and more excited. Before I move on with the absolute punchline in the story, which is going to floor all of you, I need to refer to a story which I did not talk about from my first book. 2 weeks before my department shut down and I got laid off, something was not right in my spirit, and I felt really agitated, and I did something really unusual. I had never gone on a solo spiritual retreat before in my life. And I was so disturbed that I decided to take a day off from work and to find a retreat center somewhere in Hong Kong. I randomly found this retreat center on another outlying island in Hong Kong by the name of Bethany. And I'd never been there before, and I expected to be a day of solitude, so I didn't expect anyone to minister to me there. So I took the ferry, did my quiet time there, walked up the hill, which was a much longer hill than they had advertised. Well, it was a much longer walk than they had advertised. So I was kind of sweet the time I got to Bethany. And then I was greeted by this old British couple. They were also staying there, and a stewardship journey. And after that, they were very affirming. They said, you're definitely on the right path. You're honoring God, and that's all very good. And then the old lady asked me, "Is there any scripture that spoke to you today? If you've done your quiet time already?" I said, "Well, I did my quiet time on the ferry. I did my chapter Old Testament, I did my chapter New Testament, I did my chapter of Psalms, and I read the Proverbs chapter for the day, but nothing really spoke to me." And then out of nowhere, now I met her only for the first time. I didn't have to tell her all my secrets, right? Out of nowhere, I felt the urge to share with her my birthday verse. Now, what's a birthday verse? It's a Korean brother told me your birth month with a chapter and the day of birth with the verse, and then go through all 66 chapters in the Bible, then see which one resonates with you the most. The verse that resonates with you the most, that's your birthday verse. So mine is from the book of Ruth, and that verse in Ruth basically says, may the God of Israel reward you richly for what you have done, because you have come under his wings as your refuge. So I shared that verse with her, and then she said, "Oh, okay. Well," and then she told me, "Well, I'm sorry to inform you that the prayer chapel has been taken down, but there's another guest room across the hall from where they were staying." She said, "Well, why don't you use that empty guest room for the day, and you can do your retreat here." So she led me to the room. Outside their room, there was a door sign, and it said Barnabas. So their room was the Barnabas room, and I thought it was fitting enough. They were very encouraging as a couple. Now, and then she turned to the other guest room, and there was no door sign. There was no name on the door. So she opened the door, showed me the room. It was very basic: a single bed, an air conditioner, a desk, and a chair. And then she said, just have a great retreat. Do whatever you want. You can roam around the garden if you like. Just have a good day. She closes the door, and then there's there's a sign behind the door from the inside. It is the Ruth room. So again, this must be like the 500th time I've told this story, but I still feel a surge of electricity going through my body. So the point of sidetracking you is to let you know that the name Ruth has a very significant spiritual meaning to me. So now we go back to to the celebration of generosity with my conversation with the Singaporean lady. So we were talking about going to Israel to meet the largest shareholder of the Israeli private company, right? Okay. So the major shareholder is the richest family in Israel. The patriarch is pretty old now, and he's handed the keys to his next generation. For this arm of the business is a daughter. Guess what her name is? It's Ruth. So when I heard that, I was about to like get floored on, I almost floored. And then I just knew that this has to be from God. I it's just so coincidental. It is just impossible. How could it not be from God? And I was so confident, um, that and I was so happy. And then I told my wife, and then she's like, "Well, there's something else that you'll be really happy about." I said, "What's that, honey?" And she said, "Well, I know that you love, being on TV and stuff. Because when I was a child, I starred in 2 TV commercials in Hong Kong. So so my wife said, "You're gonna love this." A journalist from China, and so I was just, it was coffee break. I was walking around, and then this lady walks up to me, and she said, "Oh, hi, I'm from a mass media ministry in Beijing, and yeah, I'd really like to speak to you." So I said, "Oh, okay. So you just met with Sylvia, right, my wife?" And she's like, "Oh, sorry, no, I haven't." So I was really puzzled. How could that be? My wife just said there was a journalist. So quickly, I put the two and two together. Actually, there was more than one journalist from China that wanted to speak to me, and I was just like so happy. And it turned out that, and I was so ignorant that I didn't even know that there was such a thing as a Christian mass media ministries in China. I thought that was an oxymoron. And basically, they both said that they were so moved by my story, and that the people in mainland China, especially the brothers and sisters there, they really need to hear my story on stewardship and generosity, so on and so forth. And they said, "Oh, you got to come to China sometime. You got to come to China sometime." So I thought, well, okay, whatever. Let me deal with this Israeli situation first. So at lunchtime, I sat down with a Singaporean couple together with my wife, and we discussed in further detail about, what the specifics about, what was so special about this company and how it was going to dethrone the company I had just sold out of. And then out of nowhere, I heard the voice from God. I knew it was from God because it came from nowhere. But it was such a different tone. It was so different from all the times before. This time it was a warning tone. He was saying this almost angrily, warning me, "Do not do this. Do not do this." And then I was thinking, "God, what do you mean?" And I knew he was talking about the investing in this Israeli company. And I thought, "God, how could you possibly say this?" I mean, it's the Singaporean lady. She got the mandate, and then she recognized the stock I sold. And then this Ruth thing, and then the CEO was going to be in town, and the chance to go to Israel. I've never been to Israel before, Lord. You know that. So, but then I knew it was from God, and I knew what He said. He said, "No, don't do this." So, but I was a little bit naughty. I refused to give up the chance to go to Israel because of this. Because I had turned down many pilgrimages before, either thinking, "Oh, it's too hot," or, "Oh, I might have a deal going on at work. I won't be able to make it," or, "Oh, there might be a conflict. It might be dangerous." So I had always turned down going to Israel. But this time, because of this, I was just so locked on to going. So I thought, well, I've got to go. I have to go and meet this lady Ruth, and then just to see how deep the rabbit hole goes, right? Okay, so this was organized a few weeks later, and the schedule was totally out of my hands, as you could imagine, and the trip was scheduled sometime in mid-May. So a little bit more on that later. Before that, before the evening closed, the other journalist from Beijing, she insisted that I went to Beijing to do an interview. And she said that their ministry has basically government approval, they have a official seal on Weixin, which means that the government can look into the content anytime and pull it anytime. And she said, come and do a full-length interview with us, and film, do a short video that goes along with it. So I obeyed, and so on April 23rd, I went to Beijing to do this interview and do the short video. And while I was in town, I also looked up the other mass media ministry, and I met with them at their office, and that ministry does more filming stuff. So they were debating whether to do a full-length feature film on my story or whether to shoot a short video. I was clearly hoping that they would do a full-length film on my story, but sadly they didn't. I guess they didn't have the budget to do that. But they invited a film director, and they invited, and then this is the crazy part. Now, remember that at this conference that I spoke at, my book was not ready, right? The book was not published. I had not even sold the first copy of my book. But at this mass media ministry, when I met with a film director, unbeknownst to me, they also brought in a translator. And the purpose of that was, this lady hadn't even read my book yet, but she said, it is so powerful that I want to help you translate it to Chinese right away. And then again, I had this surge of electricity going through my body. I had never, this is impossible. I had thought, gleefully that maybe, if one day the English becomes a good bestseller, then then maybe I'll invest in translating it to Chinese. But never would I have dreamed in a million years that even before it's published, it would already be, translation work on it would already begin. So, and then during that trip, I also met a group of brothers and sisters in an international church in Beijing, and they heard my story, and they were so moved by it. They decided that, okay, this should be brought to the workplace this should be done as a workplace ministry thing in Beijing. And they said, okay, let's be bold. Let's rent a downtown CBD ballroom in Beijing. And but we'll make it a secular version of your sharing. Take out all the religious words, take out church, Bible, and the Trinity, and just share your experience, what happened. And so that was planned as a subsequent trip to Beijing. So after I came back from Beijing, my wife was sufficiently disturbed that now I was going to all these places that's a little bit dangerous for ministry, and she was worried that, what if something happened to you, then how can we continuing operating our family. So I did what I thought was the one and only and most responsible thing, which was I set up a will in early May before I went to Israel. So I did that, and then I went to Israel. So we landed in Tel Aviv, checked into this hotel in Herzliya, and then I didn't even know when we were gonna meet Ruth. It turned out to be like, check in the hotel, shower, have lunch, and then, immediately go to Ruth's office. So my strategy was to say as little as possible, because, they're probably looking for reasons to exclude me from becoming a shareholder. But paradoxically, the CEO, he said, "Oh, Roger, why don't you tell Ruth about your story on and how you a short version of it, what brought you to this point." So I condensed it into like a 3 to 5 minute version, and then she just nodded her head. I mean, she's not a mess. She is not a Messianic Jew. So she just kind of nodded her head and kind of gently smiled. Anyway, after I met Ruth, and then the following day I met with the company management, the CEO was very, very generous. He knows the Bible extremely well, actually. He's from his parents moved to India. He actually looks Indian, but he's Jewish. And then he was so kind that he offered, since we came all the way to Israel, he hired a very luxurious tour van and a tour guide for us to go to Jerusalem and Galilee. So totally unbeknownst to me, the day I went to Jerusalem, now this calendar was totally out of my hands. That happened to fall on Ascension Day. So I was in Jerusalem for the first time in my life, and it was just randomly on Ascension Day. The sights and sounds of Old City Jerusalem really registered with me. I was particularly the slippery, narrow limestone paths that in Old City Jerusalem, and I was just imagining that, Jesus walked these limestone paths. And then as we got to the church in the Christian quarters, I was very moved by the prospect of paying my respects at Golgotha. And what really took the sight that really was remarkable to me was the super steep, narrow, winding staircase that led up to Golgotha, and that imagery just could not escape my mind. So after that, I came back to Hong Kong, and finally in June, my book was published. So, and then the books arrived on the same day that the first Beijing Mass Media Christian Ministry published my full-length interview on Weixin. So I thought that was another kind of coincidence that was hard to explain. A day or two later, a brother from my worship band, he sent over an image from Amazon. I had never bought anything from Amazon before, so it took me a while to process what that snapshot was about. That photo said best new sellers or best new releases in Christian stewardship. And then I was looking at the photo, there were like 7 or 8 book covers on there, and then I noticed this was on the top left-hand corner, and it had a number next to it. It was number 1. And then it took me a little while to process that. I couldn't believe that my humble little book turned out to be the number 1 best new release in the Christian stewardship category. And I was just, I was super happy, and then I started thinking, a lot of crazy thoughts, thinking that, okay, I knew it. This is going to be, God had basically not given me back my job after the book got published, and this must be the new way He is providing for me. It's going to be through royalties from this book, and so I thought. And then I became so obsessed with the book rankings that at one point I became a bit ashamed of it, because I was reminded 16 to 17, which basically says, for everything in the world, the lust of the pride of life. Sorry. And the pride of life comes not from the Father, but from the world. The world and its desires pass away, but whoever does the will of God lives forever. Addiction. Before, I used to be super, I had an addiction on looking at share prices, and I had this, meticulous spreadsheet and keeping track of my net worth every day, depending on, how the stocks moved. And now my new fix was, going on this Amazon page and checking on my ranking, and it was pitiful. So I went back to Beijing in middle of June, and and the main event was to do the secular workplace event, and in a downtown hotel, and I didn't even know that they actually sold tickets to cover the cost for renting the ballroom, and it was a reasonably well turned out event. And the brothers and sisters were take the show on the road, and let's hit all the other tier 1 cities in China next. So Shanghai was the next destination, and we will definitely talk about that. And then another agenda item on this Beijing trip was I purposely stayed behind away from my family for quite some time since my Israel trip. And the purpose was to film the 9-minute video. So that was filmed, and I really enjoyed the process. And that video has now gone to, has different languages and subtitles, and it actually even made it to the National Christian Foundation in Atlanta, Georgia. And it made the Saturday Sevens list. So that's another big blessing and a real honor. In the interest of time, I'm going to skip over a trip to India, unless it's of interest to you. Do you want me to talk about the trip to India? Yes? Thumbs up? No? Thumbs up? Okay. So I forgot to mention that during the celebration of generosity, actually, I was shown 3 geographies. I was clearly brought to Israel, I was brought to China, and I was also brought to India. There was another couple from southern India that was invited to speak at the conference, and they shared brilliantly, and then they were going to host a similar event in southern India, and they invited me to be one of the guests. So I went to India. I've been there many times for work, but I've never been to this particular city before. I knew I was supposed to apply for a business visa because I was attending a conference, but out of convenience, I just applied for a tourist visa, just thinking that it doesn't do any harm, right? So, and my usual traveling habit is to just wear my suit on the flight, because I hate to, wrinkle it when I pack it in my suitcase and then have to, get it ironed. So I just wore my suit. And, as usual, it's, the flight from Hong Kong to India lands at around, 1 or 2 a.m. And then once I got to the customs immigration officer, I got really, really frightened. He started asking me questions. He started asking me, show me the itinerary that you've planned for all the tourist site visiting stops that you're making on this trip. And then I clearly didn't, because I was just going to a conference. So I just pretended I couldn't understand him, and I just showed him, my boarding pass on my phone, and he's like, no, I'm not after your boarding pass. I want to see the Google search on all the sites that you're on your phone. And then I just kept pretending I couldn't understand him. And then another guy came out, and then he said, well, are you staying in this port the whole time, or are you traveling into other parts of the country? I said, oh, no, I'm just staying here. I'm just staying in this port the whole time. I'm not going anywhere. And then they were like, okay, go. So I was like, phew. So we went to this conference, and so basically the global superstar team was invited to share. So all the top-notch speakers from Generosity Path were invited to at this Indian conference, and I felt I was part of the squad. I felt, oh, finally, I feel like I belong to the Avengers, kind of. But I'm like Hawkeye. I'm like the guy without the superpower, but at least I'm on the squad. And then the night before I was due to share my story, there was a severe spiritual attack, and it happened on my daughter. She had complained a week or two ago when we went on holiday in Thailand and New Zealand that her hearing was not so good. So while I was in southern India, my wife brought her to see, to get an ear checkup. And then the checkup result was she's clinically deaf. And I'm like, how's that possible? We're talking to her, she's hearing. I mean, how could you say that she's deaf? So I was very disturbed. And then, God is so merciful and faithful. One of the co-organizers for the event, their son was born deaf. So she was super well informed in this area of hearing problems. And she reassured me and my wife, saying that, just go seek a second opinion. She's definitely not clinically deaf, just don't worry about it. So I delivered my sharing, and then went back to Hong Kong. And then the next day we got another checkup, and then, she passed with flying colors. So that was, so I became more and more aware that my ministry was attracting displeasure from the enemy camp. So so I got back from India in like late August. So my wife's birthday was in September 10th. And at that point, I started to receive some royalty checks from the publisher on my book. And because that's income, I could not help it but to excitedly reestablish my spiritual discipline of tithing to my church account. But this time around, it's impossible to set up an auto pay because the amounts will fluctuate a lot. So my new tithing paradigm is that I would have to manually calculate all my investment gains, all my interest income, and my royalties, which is a little bit of a pain. But I thought that it's a joy to do, because I get to reestablish this very special, intimate way of honoring God, which had been so important to me for the last, ever since 2005. So remember that I mentioned that the Beijing trip was so successful that the brothers and sisters planned the next trip to be in Shanghai. So so another couple took the baton and they started planning this Shanghai sharing. So they invited me and this other American gentleman to be the speakers at this event that they planned. Now, I cannot understand in the life of me why they put these two words on the top of the poster, which featured me, who is from Hong Kong, and an American Caucasian. The two words that they chose to put on top in like size 40 font on top of the poster was overthrow. And I was like, dude, what are you thinking? Are you trying to get me in trouble? I mean, what are you thinking? And then they justified saying, oh, this is a really common term that we use in like Christian circles in China, it has no political connotations whatsoever. I'm like, yeah, you got to be kidding me. So we agreed on changing the title to Flipping Your Life Upside Down. I thought, well, that's still not the best, but at least it's certainly better than Overthrow. So the commitment was to speak in Shanghai right after my wife's birthday. So, but the problem was that weekend, Hong Kong was going to face a Category 5 hurricane. It was going to be the strongest storm in basically 100 years that was going to come to hit Hong Kong. And the Royal Observatory, the observatory in Hong Kong even said, you know, you really need to prepare for this one. This one's going to be bad. But I made a commitment. They sold tickets. You know, my job is to obey and to serve the Lord, you know, above anything else. So I hopped on the plane, and it was with a heavy heart that I left behind my wife and 2 kids to brace the storm at home by themselves. So I landed on Shanghai Friday evening. I met up with everyone, and then including the American speaker. And then shortly after, we went our separate ways to check in our hotel. I was a bit surprised why I didn't feel any nerves, because normally I would feel kind of nervous the day before I speak. And then when Saturday morning I woke up and I switched on my phone, then I discovered why I did not feel nervous. The organizing couple was encouraged to cancel the event for reasons that they will not disclose to me over the phone or on chat group. They said, I will only tell you when we meet up in the French quarters to debrief. And I was so angry. I told you guys not to put those stupid word of overthrow on the poster. Now you got me you got us into trouble. I left my wife and family to face the biggest hurricane in 100 years, and now I'm stranded here. And I have such a lowly frequent flyer Myers status, program status, that there's no chance that I could get on standby at the airport to get back to Hong Kong before they close the airspace. So I was super angry. So I got in a cab with everybody else, got to the French quarters. I've never been there before. Once I got to the entrance of Tianzifang and the French quarters, something very, very bizarre struck me. The paths were basically paved with limestone, and it was very narrow and windy, and there was chaotic activity all around. I thought, wow, this reminds me of something. This reminds me of Old City Jerusalem. So we were walking around in this labyrinth trying to look for this restaurant that they just gave us this address to meet. Finally, we found the restaurant. After we walk in, and then something else really freaked me out. Why is there such a narrow, steep, winding staircase and dark? It reminds me of the staircase that led up to Golgotha in the church in the Christian quarters in Old City Jerusalem. So I walk up there kind of expectantly that something significant was going to happen. Once we got through those stairs, there was another small flight of stairs, and then there was this large room. And there sat a group of disciples of Jesus with their heads hung down, like looking totally defeated. And then it reminded me, well, maybe this is what it was like 2,000 years ago in the upper room, where another group of deflated disciples felt completely defeated and sitting around in there, moping around. So we started the debriefing. There wasn't actually a lot to talk about. They claim it wasn't the poster. They claim that actually it was the American speaker. Turns out that he was on the government's blacklist. So I thought, well, okay, at least it wasn't me, nor was it the poster. So I was a little bit, less angry. But still, it was no consolation. I left my family. They're still in Hong Kong. The storm was still coming. I still was stranded in Shanghai. And then shortly after, a young lady walked in. Initially, she looked maybe like no older than 30 years old. And she didn't introduce herself. She just sat down. It turned out that she was hosting one of the ministry leaders from Beijing. And then she started talking a little bit. She said, well, I'm a new believer. I've only come to faith for about a year, but I did something really unusual. For the first 6 months, I went to the United States to learn how to pray. And my gift is to baptize people with the Holy Spirit and to help people receive the gift of tongues. And I thought, okay, this sounds interesting, because lots of people have tried to help me with that, but every time it's failed. And then there was another lady in the room. That was her experience also. So so when this young lady said, well, would anyone like to go up to the rooftop and pray with me to receive the gift of tongues? The other lady raised her hand, and then so they left the room. 45 minutes later, they came back. She was crying like a baby, and she said, oh, I've now received the gift of tongues. And then I thought, well, what's there to lose? I came here for a ministry trip. It got canceled, and then now, no one's ever been able to baptize me successfully with the Holy Spirit. So I raised my hand. I walk up the stairs, and then I could not explain to you why. I had this feeling that it was bright. It was really bright looking up into the rooftop. And I just got the feeling it was kind of like the Mount of Transfiguration. It was another site that during the tour to Israel, we drove by there en route to Galilee. So long story short, 45 minutes, half an hour later, after we chatted and she prayed with me, I received the gift of tongues. I told this young lady many secrets that were so supernatural that I didn't even dare to write in either of my books, because it's got some serious implications. So yeah, so that was a little anecdote. So I got another speaking engagement the following day that someone managed to arrange for me the last moment, and there at that church it was the global media debut for playing that video, which I used as a 9-minute introduction to my story. So I made it more effective to go into more details and to save more time for Q&A. So after Shanghai, I came back to Hong Kong, and there were very, very few speaking engagements. And I really started to worry about my book sales, not for the reason that you would expect, but rather I had a very counterintuitive concern about my book sales. I was praying to God that I would not lean on the stream of royalties as my new source of provision, because that would be, totally self-defeating. And right around the same time, my pastor and the stewardship committee at church asked me to write a study guide based on lost and found money versus riches, in hope that it can turn into a cell group material that our church can use. The same day that I finished writing the study guide, which was a very smooth process, lots of things were downloaded to me, and it made me realize that I actually enjoyed writing, because all my life I'd not really been a writer. When I went to university, it was all about GPA optimization, so I only took courses that involved math. I avoided subjects that had a lot of essay writing to save my GPA, because that was just not my strong suit. So I regained the joy of writing. I realized that God has given me this gift, especially in the area of stewardship and generosity. And but the same day that I finished writing my study guide, something bad happened. My video that was filmed months ago, that got pulled on Weixin. The government started to ban it. So that was a little bit of a discouragement. And then shortly after, I got inspiration, just looking back in my whole 2018 diary, that God was not only interested in me surrendering control to him in the area of money. And then as I mapped out all the events, I realized that he was he then took away control from me and my vocation, which meant that he had total control of my time. And then thereafter, he wrestled away my control over my sense of personal safety, bringing me to China and Israel and India and all these, and Shanghai and all these, quote unquote, risky places for ministry. And then last but not least, he was wrestling away my sense of control over my life purpose. So looking at all the data points in my spiritual calendar for 2018, plus regaining this joy, discovering this newfound joy in writing, it occurred to me that maybe God wants me to write this book. And you may notice that actually at the ending of this book, it did not contain the sell everything story. This book ended with me just making the pledge. And when the sell everything story happened, I knew I had to write another book, but I just didn't know what to write. So after the full year of this so much journeyful of events, I knew that it was time to write, and it would eventually become Lose to Find, Change of Control. And I knew it would not do well because it's even more unpleasant of a message to Christendom, which is to trust and obey God. So in the interest of time, I'm going to skip over some details. The day, okay, but this I think I should mention. The day I started to write the very first words of this book, and again, it was totally reading cycle had just finished, and that takes about 3 years, 2.5, 3 years. The day I happened to pen the first words of this book, my Old Testament reading recycled back to Genesis 1. So the first words of this book coincided with my Old Testament reading of Genesis 1. So I thought that was also kind of neat. And then I discovered my my book sales was actually really, really terrible. So terrible that I had to question the publisher. The ranking was all along through the summer was pretty good. So I was just completely shocked at how few copies it was actually sold. And on the day that I received news on how bad the royalties were, basically I got 2 offers. It was as if God was asking me, do you want to fold or double down? That day, I received 2 offers. One was to basically publish the traditional Chinese version of Lost and Found Money versus Riches in Hong Kong, which costs money. And then I also got an offer from a Chinese communications ministry that they said, now, no guarantees, no promises, but we will try to find you a publisher in China so that the simplified Chinese version of Lost and Found Money versus Riches could potentially be published. Again, this costs a bit of money. So God was really asking me, so you're not getting, your provision is not coming from your English book. And now I'm giving you the opportunity to extend this ministry to the Chinese language. Are you willing to spend more of my money instead of worrying about yourself to do my work? So I did it. I doubled down, and then the rest is history. Now I'm going to skip to the very last stop of my 2018 journey. Remember in March when I met with Mac Peer, God had told me to be there in Washington, D.C. So God basically blocked out my whole year's calendar, and I went to Washington, D.C. So my spiritual antennas were like way up that day in DC, and I brought tons and tons of copies of this book with me, just thinking that, okay, there must be someone or some people that God really wants me to meet to make this, a super impactful thing. Otherwise, why would he block out my whole whole year's worth of calendar, right? So whenever I encountered someone I deemed important, I would basically give him or her a copy of this book. But no one really seemed to be overly excited about when they saw the cover of my book, or no one seemed to pay that much attention to what I had to say. So I was definitely a bit deflated and disappointed. I was seated at a table with some people from Singapore and some people from Dubai. It's interesting, I always get seated next to Singaporeans. And seated next to me was this giant size Asian guy. He walked in a bit late, and when I looked at him, he was dressed a bit casually. He was like 6'5", 250 pounds. And initially I thought, well, he must be a Northeastern Chinese guy. But it turns out he's not. He's from Singapore. This guy, he showed zero interest in talking to me. For the whole day I sat next to him, we exchanged no more than 20 words. So rest assured, I did not give him a copy of my book. And so I left the conference feeling really disappointed, and I was heavily jet lagged. And I walked all the way from the Bible Museum, where it was hosted, to my hotel. And then I found a small French restaurant to at least get myself a good dinner to basically drown my sorrows a little. I made a mistake of I couldn't even finish dinner. The steak was overly seasoned, and I made a mistake of going to bed too early, and then jet lag woke me up at like 3 o'clock in the morning. And I was hating life. I was lamenting, why did I come to Washington, D.C.? And then I was so bored playing with my phone. I even checked one email account that's basically dormant. I never checked that email account. It's linked to the website, the first website associated with my book. For the last few months, I had only received a lot of indecent spam emails on it, so I just stopped checking it. But I was so bored that day, that night, after playing with everything on my phone, I checked that email. And then there, I was shocked. There was a proper email that was in the inbox. It said, and the title was Divine Connection. And who was it from? It was from the Singaporean guy who sat next to me the whole day and showed no interest in talking to me at all. So I opened up his email, and he said, Holy Spirit woke him up 2 hours ago with back pain, and Holy Spirit told him to buy my book on Kindle. He read it, and then immediately he said, I am going to be the mouthpiece for God to the nations. And I thought, wow, this is kind of crazy. And then I don't know why, out of nowhere, I was reminded of one obscure fact. The fact that the late Reverend Billy Graham was in Singapore in 1978, and he made a prophecy that Singapore was going to become the Antioch of Asia. Now, I don't know this guy at all, but I don't know why. I just wrote all that down in response to his email. And then he writes back. He said, Billy Graham was in Singapore with my father in 1978 when he made that statement. I just started a foundation a few months ago by the name of Antioch for Asia. And the purpose is to get each Singaporean Christian to donate $5,000 Singapore dollars annually, such that there will be, $1 billion Sing dollars annually to reach all unreached people groups. And then you can imagine how much electricity was going through my body. And then I quipped to him that maybe my role is to turn all the Crazy Rich Asians, which was a hit movie about Singaporeans a few years ago, and turn them into Crazy Generous Asians. So I'm going to end my story now and turn it over back to Brother Charans and go into Q&A. Thank you so much.
Very much. Thank you very much, Roger. I must say that your whole life story has been exciting and intriguing and captivating. Because and you have the flair just to flow from one point to the next point, with such ease. Um, so we want to thank you really. I mean, showing us, several things came out there, how God really uses us, and we need to keep our faith and our trust in Him, and so He would direct our pathways. And I
Hmm.
recognize that God has really directed your pathway. He has selected you from
Mm.
so many persons, and He has a special place to use you, especially in that part of the world, to share His word, to encourage others to come and to have a closer relationship with God. And we become inspired when we hear of testimonies uh, like like yours. And on behalf of all the brothers and sisters, tonight we want to thank you for sharing part of your life story, how God has really transformed your life from one thing to the next. And I always say, when we give ourselves over to service for God, He can do wondrous things. We should never limit ourselves, our potential. God has worked miracles in the time of Jesus. He's still working miracles, and our life is waiting to be transformed by another miracle, and all for the glory and the honor of God. So thank you very much, and we pray that God will bless you and your family and continue to do wonderful things. At this point in time,